Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Module 5. This module is 2 weeks from April 7th to the 19th, and the focus is monitoring, feedback, and assessment for self-regulated learning. It's probably one of the most important areas to discuss in self-regulated learning, and I hope by now you're starting, or from this module to the other modules that you've already done, start making some really strong connections between the theories, the practices, the strategies, and to the final part of monitoring, feedback, and assessment. So again, welcome to Module 5, looking at monitoring, feedback, and assessment for self-regulated learning. This is also the final module of the course. So Module 6 is considered the course closure. It's a 3-week or almost like a 2.5 week for you to work on your cumulative assignment of the video for the course. Module 5 is focused on a few student learning outcomes. So developing and using proven forms of feedback and assessment that will promote the development of self-efficacy and student success. And this is important because people think that self-regulated learning monitoring is about learning, but the learning part is also tangled up with the motivation one feels. So it's not just cognitive, but it's also motivation, behavior, and actions that you take as building your self-efficacy. So it's also about exploring the self-talk and self-regulated learning, and I hope that the articles will provide some of that, the internal feedback loop. Connecting to assessment as, of, for, and learning. So that's a part of the growing success document as you sort of do a treasure hunt around that document, and discussing student learning skills related to the Ontario Ministry of Education. I wanted to give a little shout out here to assignment number 2. Great job, everyone. I really enjoyed reading the observations. So one of the things that I think was clear, and maybe not to you as you were first reading it, but it was clear to me that when you asked your students what they were learning, or why they were learning it, it was focused more on just to get the work done, or so that I don't have to bring it home for homework. And I was smiling because it reiterates the focus of, are the students looking at just performing or learning, and how can you then intervene in that process and their let's say mindset of what they're doing in school is about learning and not just about finishing the task so it's not going to go to homework. So the other part that I think was a big from everyone was that self-regulated learning is very individualistic. And so developing strategies for every student is key for them to have ownership of their learning. And there is no one size fits all, which you might think is a bit challenging to individualize each student with some self-regulated learning skills and strategies. But in actual fact, there's commonalities within it, and then small adjustments along the way. So it's not a big onus or to make sure that everyone is getting exactly what they need. So the transition from being dependent on the teacher to ownership of their learning is probably the end goal of self-regulated learning. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it was eye-opening for you to see what students actually said about the learning. But what is encouraging is that you are seeing self-regulated learning in the classrooms. You're hearing it from the students, and they are understanding why they are learning specific skills or what they're supposed to be learning. And so I think the next step that I saw in a lot of your observations was helping them with the performance to learning aspect, bridging that gap. So great job, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learned a lot from that assignment. So a reminder that the 4 domains of self-regulated learning, like you need another reminder, is cognitive, motivation, affect, behavior, and metacognition. And so how does this tie into feedback and the assessment and monitoring of what you're doing? So how to give feedback on these 4 areas, and should this be your guiding framework for feedback for learning and self-regulated learning? So as a teacher, you can use these 4 domains to think about how you approach feedback, as well as how you approach monitoring tools. I have included in the next following slides a few feedback frameworks and assessment structures, the progress report, just to have a small kind of a snapshot of some of the things that you could be using as a way to give more effective feedback that moves the students into a more self-regulated learning direction. So how would you modify these to increase self-regulated learning? So think about that as you're using, let's just call them non-focused self-regulated learning feedback models. So self-regulated learning monitoring tools for students can be very tricky. And the reasons why is that these MTs, what I'm going to call them, is recording, monitoring, and evaluating performance, development, and learning. So what tends to happen is a checklist is an assessment tool that lists a specific criteria for the skills, behaviors, or attitudes that participants should demonstrate to show successful learning from the teaching provided. So checklists usually feature statements or questions about the participant's performance of each criterion. For self-regulated learning, it should include statements or questions about learning. Do you see the difference and how easy it could be for an MT to fall into performance alone with no consideration for learning? And so I want you to think about the checklist part of that is in the PDF file that I've attached, that is an overview of how to put together a monitoring tool and what to the look fors and how to increase your how to form your monitoring tool that increases or promotes the direction towards self-regulated learning. And you think of educational assessment tools that could be used, you think, for monitoring learning. So that's where the assessment of, for, and as learning really comes into play here, when you know the difference between what's what and the feedback that you give. But again, it's not just the feedback, it's the direction that you're moving the feedback and for what purposes. So before you go on, you can listen to the rest of this PowerPoint, but there is a file in the modules section that has a PDF file talking about monitoring tools. And as you review that, you'll start to see how monitoring tools can be very performance zone focused, and therefore leaving out the parts of learning. So hopefully you can see the difference between the two and know how to make a monitoring tool, or start working on a monitoring tool that will promote both performance and learning zones. So feedback frameworks are this is a great one, actually. If you're thinking about effective feedback, answers 3 questions. So the purpose is to reduce discrepancies between current understandings, performance, and a desired goal. So the desired goal could be the student learning outcome. And so what do you look for? The discrepancies. And here's a module that really helps. And this one that I use a lot because I like to give people sometimes it's knowledge building, but consider this as a point of what's your next step in your learning after you've done the assessment. So I think review this feedback framework, use it, and see how it works in your class when you're doing your practicum. See if it's a good tool to use to help students move towards self-regulated learning better than just thinking about the performance of what they're doing. The second feedback framework looks at feedback process, but also includes the student. So here's something that you can use that the student also has a part in. And also student feedback questions, the goals, where am I going, learning strategies, etc. So take a look at these and see, is there ways to improve this to help promote or better promote self-regulated learning. I'm sure we're all aware that assessment structures include rubrics. A while ago, I was introduced to this single point rubric, which I thought was quite interesting because it talks about, this is just an example, but on one side is the criteria, and then the other side would be the concerns about the criteria, and the other side would be advanced. So the notes on what needs improvement, and then notes on how the work exceeds expectations, and the criteria is in the middle. And I thought this was really interesting because it looks, I mean, sometimes, if everything is okay, how can you push learners towards a new level? So I think this is, I don't know if you've ever experienced this single point rubric before, but it is quite interesting and a good way to change it up in your rubric structures. This is a snapshot of the progress report taken from the, I think it's grade 1 to 2 progress report from the Ontario Ministry. And you can look through these and look at the learning skills and work habits. And of course, you see this one here that is right at the bottom, self-regulated learning. So review the points in this and see how or what you would do to think of a monitoring tool or an assessment or a feedback that would give you evidence that you could accurately put the student in excellent, good, satisfactory, needs improvement, and why. And I think this is important that you start to get used to the language that's being used in the Ontario Ministry report or progress reports as well. For those of you who are going to stepping into teaching in Ontario, this is what you're going to have to use. So I think if you started looking at this now and thinking, how do I get evidence to show that the students are doing this, and the feedback that you would gather from that in order to move them into the direction that they would need to achieve this, from either going from satisfactory to good or good to excellent or etc. Okay? So here's our lovely learning zone and performance zone again. So feedback for both zones. So that is kind of the, let's say, the sweet spot of a monitoring tool, or that's the sweet spot of an assessment. How your feedback will be different for each, the learning and the performance zone. Consider you are organizing your assessments, expectations, student learning outcomes, and criteria, promote the learning and performance zone. And what could you do after the assessment to support self-regulated learning? And I think as you start reading the articles, you're going to see how it's really a focus on internal feedback, which means what the students are coming up with on their own. So that's the kind of the end goal, let's say, that students can assess their own learning without you. As you read each resource, consider the following questions. So for reading 1, it is Chung and Yuan, which is 2011 article. And they talk a lot about the role of a feedback and assessment. So consider, what is the role? Reading number 2 is Nicole and McFarland Dick, 2006. So how is formative feedback explained? What are the gaps identified in feedback? What are the solutions guidelines presented in the article? And reading number 3 is, where did I put reading? Chu and Zhou, which is 2020. And what are the identified central questions for self-regulated learning? What recommendations are suggested in this article? And then for reading number 4, it is just the growing success document. So I want you to just go through it and think about your comments, what's there about self-regulated learning, and what are your comments about this document. I want to make a few points about each of these articles just to keep your focus as you're reading through them. So the first article, Sheng and Yon in 2011, they start off with a little introduction about self-regulated learning, an overview, a good review again. But they also talk about not just the role of feedback or descriptive feedback, but also how things like motivation, environmental factors plays into the feedback process and what's taken from feedback. So how can feedback promote self-regulated learning? And really, again, not just looking at the cognitive process of feedback. In the second article, Nickel and McFarland Dick, 2006. Formal assessment of feedback, and it's specific to feedback. Sorry, I've got jot notes here, but it looks at learning and shifting the idea within students that learning is not just the teacher doing the talking and the memorization, but shifting it so that learners are moving towards constructivist learning where they're constructing their own learning. And I think that's a good connection between the theory and practice of self-regulated learning. So they talk about some of the challenges of the transmission of feedback. So in other words, when you give feedback, how do students translate that and how do they put it into their work so that it's moving them towards better learning, better outcomes, whatever. And so in page 202, it was a really good quote. Self-regulated learning is an active, constructive process whereby learners set goals for their learning and monitor, regulate, and control their cognitive, motivation, and behavior guided by and constrained by their goals. So I think that's really good. Is reread that a couple times. It's on page 102, and I think it's really good that that is a really key message when it comes to rolling teaching into creating a constructivist learner, but also the emphasis on monitoring and the feedback that the learner needs to learn to engage with in order to promote learning for themselves. Self-regulated learning feedback related to cognitive motivation and behavior. They give some 7 principles of good feedback, which I think is really good. Take your time, go through this article. And the whole idea is that the student can produce that internal feedback needed. The final article is Shu and Zhou, which is 2020, and they talk about internal, external feedback. So how the balance between what the teacher gives as feedback and what the students can take from that and use for internal feedback, and then how to help or support, in both cases, the identified discrepancies within the learning and what's achieved. So how to promote internal feedback to support self-regulated learning. This is a really key thing when it comes to students and the teacher's role with self-regulated learning. So how are the students going to know how to ask themselves the questions and etc. And with this article, don't be intimidated by the quantitative measurements, because just read the content and look at, if you can read through, but don't be intimidated by the graphs and sort of talking with numbers, because there is a lot of really good content in that article. And the last one is the connecting resource, which again is the growing success document. By now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this document. Believe me, it's not great, it's not perfect, but it does give a lot of direction when it comes to monitoring, assessment, and feedback, and the direction that you're trying to move your students towards in your teaching. So again, search through. What did you find about self-regulated learning in this document, and what are your comments on this document? So that's a part of your discussion post. So I just plucked out a few of these. Growing Success, page 6, page 10, page 14. Take a look at them in the document, see what they say, ponder over what's going on in this document. And again, page 17, the categories of knowledge and skills, knowledge and understanding. So this is the, when you think about feedback, this is the criteria that creates the feedback for the assessment. So knowledge and understanding, thinking, communication, and application. And again, it really goes hand in hand with self-regulated learning when I think, the behavior, the metacognition, etc. And page 20, the achievement chart for the arts, grade 1 to 8. Take a look at that. And page 30 talks about different kinds of assessment: diagnostic, formative, and summative. And this will really help you with learning as of 4, okay? And again, a repeat of the learning skills and work habits. And you'll notice again, the last one is self-regulation. And you're looking at responsibility, organization, independent work, collaboration, initiative, and self-regulation. The activity for Module 5 is post your responses in the discussion board to the guiding questions, and each of these are related to the readings. And they're ordered in the same as what they are on the slides. And task 2 is to respond to at least one peer by asking a question, but also providing, giving a feedback for learning, okay? Assignment number 3 is due in April 19th. I went through some of this in the last module in the video, so I'm just going to go over this again, that it is meant for you to pull together the information and the theories and etc. that you've been learning, some of these strategies, and put it together in an infograph, or otherwise known as an anchor chart, for your students to follow in order for them to be more self-sufficient. So ideally, you would target 4 of the areas: cognitive, metacognitive, behavior, and attitude. And you can use it like a check for them, a checklist, whatever way you want to organize your infograph. Also, I've outlined task 1 is to post it in the discussion area. Task 2 is to post your infograph again in the assignment area. Then go back to the discussion area, choose one of your peers to review their infograph, and try to choose someone that does not have a peer review of their infograph yet. So that way everyone gets at least one peer review. You can use the template that's in the discussion area. And a reminder that even if you worked in pairs, please, everyone is to post in the assignment area and complete a peer review. Okay? So hopefully this is a good overview of this assignment. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. As you know, we're nearing the end of the course, and at the final parts is the course closure module. This module is specifically earmarked for you to do your video for the last and final assignment, which is the culminating self-regulated learning video presentation. So the idea behind this assignment is that there's no writing, or very little writing. You can do what I do, which is do your PowerPoint with the video included. And hopefully that's a little bit more practical for you. So the idea is that you go through each of the learning outcomes and talk about what you've learned, and of course integrating with resources specifically from the course resources thus far. So just a bit of heads up here as you're finishing off Module 5 and moving into the course closure module. And here you have the criteria for the video assignment. So this will guide your discussion. Easiest thing to do is just discuss each one 1 to 7. I said a 5-minute video, but it's really difficult to do this in 5 minutes. So if you can think of a 5 to 10 minute range, that would be great. I just wanted to let you know that if you are wanting to do a check-in with me, please email me and we can set up a time to have a virtual discussion or an email back and forth, whatever you prefer. But I just wanted you to know that the opportunity is there if you would like to discuss anything in the course, some upcoming assignments, or you have some concerns, or just want to have a discussion about self-regulated learning. So check in. Well, everyone, I hope you have a great 2 weeks of learning. It is an interesting module 5 about monitoring, assessment, feedback, etc. And it's a really relevant and important part to self-regulated learning. We're nearing the end of our course, so hang in there, and I hope your practicum is going well. So here's to a great 2 weeks of Module 5 learning. Take care.